Good morning, everyone. Everybody's streaming into the room right now. I see lots of cups of coffee. Find a good seat. If my video freezes up here, our moderator Marissa will take over for me. My name is Todd Bransky, and I'm simply the room host for this session. I help with the technical portion in the background. I'm frozen. Shoot. Am I on again? Welcome to day 2. My video keeps freezing. I have a bad connection this morning. There's 2 sessions this morning, and then we'll hear from our closing keynote speaker, David Kennedy from the National Network for Safe Communities, 11 a.m. And at 12 p.m. today, we have the Big Ideas Virtual Social Hour, where you can pick a room and learn about initiatives from various groups and how to get involved. And I'm going to kick this over to Marissa because my connection seems to be very unstable. Marissa, can you take this? I'm frozen.
Getting booted off there a bit. Our affordable housing project our panelists here. So let's welcome our 3 panelists. We have with us here today Stephanie Murphy, Executive Director of the Neighborhood Finance Corporation, Joe Murphy with the Iowa Business Council, and Lauren Johnson with the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. So can you all, further introduce yourselves and tell us a bit more about your background relating to housing?
Well, I guess I'll be the first to jump in before anybody else. That's promoting competitive tax policy, economic development policy, or housing policy. We think that that's something that's incredibly important for the state as we not only recover from the pandemic, but also set the foundation for our next generational growth here in the state of Iowa. And from a housing perspective in particular, and we'll get into this obviously, we really think that housing can be that key unlocking wealth potential.
I'll go ahead and go down the line here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Johnson, and I'm the Director of Communications and Community Outreach at the Polk County Housing Trust Fund here in Des Moines, Iowa. So obviously we have a little bit more of an urban focus in our work in the Des Moines Metro, but really we just work to ensure that everybody has equal access to safe, stable, and affordable housing. And importantly, that we are building to keep up with our incoming population and to grow our economy here in Polk County. So we do that in a few different ways. We do that by funding the construction of affordable housing. That's where a majority of our funding goes as an independent nonprofit organization. We also fund programs and supportive services around Polk County to ensure that folks get into permanent housing and have the resources that they need to stay in that housing. We also conduct research and planning work so that we understand better excited for the discussion this morning and grateful to be here.
And my name is Stephanie Murphy, and I am the Executive Director of Neighborhood Finance Corporation. We're a nonprofit mortgage company. We're also a member of NeighborWorks America. And we do lending in Polk County and in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
And so, don't want to get too far into the weeds just yet, but oftentimes on kind of the income spectrum in those households that are making, say, less than 80 or 50% of the average in their region, it's hard to get to that 30% threshold without some sort of subsidy involved as well. And so that's where we really start to get into these housing policy discussions and how much and to what level the state and local and sometimes federal government can subsidize those buildings.
Yeah, and before the derecho, just a couple months ago now, or even before COVID-19, affordable housing stock was already low. So can you all kind of lay the groundwork for people to understand, what the availability of affordable housing looked like across the state?
Yeah, you bet, Marissa. So I can come in with some numbers before we open it up a little bit. And so in the state of Iowa as a whole, we really do not have the appropriate number of rental units for the need in those lower income households, right? So we have almost 100,000 extremely low income renter households. So what I mean by that is folks who are making less than 30% of median income. And even better way to put that is people who are really making about $10 an hour, right? So kind of service level jobs. With that being said, we only have about 45,000 available units that would be affordable to those households. So really, we're just about at half capacity, or we're at full capacity because we only have half of the units that we need across the state, especially for those service level jobs. And your servers, the people who may give you your coffee in the morning, and the people who take care of your kids during the day as well. And so we have quite a lot of work to do, not only in our urban areas, but also in our rural areas, to ensure that every aspect of our workforce has a safe, stable, and affordable place to call home.
And I think it really goes into the economic development aspect, particularly in the rural parts of our state, where you might be a little bit farther spread out from where you live compared to where you work, and then compared to where your childcare facilities might be. So you might be having a very circuitous commute as you're dropping off your children, then getting to work, and then going back to get your children at the end of the day, and then going back to your home. And the affordability piece is crucial to this discussion because, as Lauren so eloquently put it, I mean, some of these individuals that are working and struggling with payments, they're a bad day away from a very dire financial situation. And if their car breaks down on their commute, 10, 15, 20 mile commute into town to drop off their kids at childcare, and then they've got to go to work, which might be another 20 or 30 minutes of a drive. If they have a breakdown, if they have an unexpected bill, that could really put them into an extremely strenuous situation, not only with respect to their home payment or their rent payment, but also their ability to have a job. And so we really view housing as an economic opportunity that really provides that stability. It goes back to Maslow's theory on shelter. What do you need the most? And that's why we think it's so critical to elevate the issue of housing in Iowa in a grand scale. You hear a lot about the housing difficulties in Washington, D.C. or Seattle or San Francisco and New York City. And certainly those cases are profound and very, very difficult. And then some might say, well, we're in Iowa, we don't really have those issues, but we absolutely do. And we want to make sure that we can put in policy positions right now at the state level so that we don't ever get to that, incredibly difficult and dire situation that you see in some of the other, larger cities around the country. And we'll talk more, I'm sure, in a little bit about statewide policymaking. But I think the really good news for all of us in this forum today to talk about is the fact that this really is not a partisan issue. We've seen Republicans and Democrats come together on this issue and work in a very strong bipartisan way to adjust this issue. Of course, they might have different ideas on it, but the fact that everybody understands, I think, that housing is a critical issue and a critical component for broader economic development and growth in this state, I think is very important. And I think it's very noble of legislators to understand that and to put forward some policies that will hopefully start to move the needle in the right way.
And then, what does this all mean for individual people and families who are struggling to find affordable housing? What options have they had to find housing that they can afford?
Well, I can tell you from a homeownership perspective, we know that people spend a lot of time looking for a house that's affordable and safe. Not to just talk about our program, but that's one reason our program works well is because you can find that house that maybe needs a new roof or a new furnace and convert it to a safe and affordable home. We have found, we had the opportunity to administer quite a bit of down payment money over the past few years. We did over 800 down payment loans. And putting that kind of money into the transaction and creating the affordability through that really did expand the number of homes that were available to low-income people. And we were really heartened. It was a good feeling to see the opportunities that were presented by giving people $10,000 to $20,000 in down payment money.
Yeah, and kind of talking about down payments and, owner occupied homes, it's really interesting because here in Iowa, we have kind of an interesting, somewhat of an issue, but what we see here in Iowa is that folks actually buy homes that are much less than the kind of max that they could afford, right? And so that makes a lot of sense on a personal financial level. I certainly am part of that club as well, and would like to keep on a budget here. And so it's very fiscally responsible individually, but then when you zoom out a little bit, you see that the folks who that's really the max of what they could afford, they have a harder time finding an available home to buy. Right. And so that's why it's really important that we continue to grow our housing stock and the owner occupied kind of single family home perspective. But of course, that's very difficult because construction costs continue to rise. And so that's why last year and into this year, the Polk County Housing Trust Fund had a pilot program with Prairie Meadows that was funded by a Prairie Meadows Legacy Grant with $250,000, in which we would match a down payment up to $15,000 for families, making a certain amount of money, I believe is below 80% of area median income or right around that range. So we would match that down payment, and on the condition that this was a newly developed home. So the thought behind that is really to incentivize developers with those larger down payments to ensure that we're building up that stock so that we have a wider variety of homes that are really in that kind of affordability sweet spot, think between $215,000 and $240,000. We have a lot of aging homes, speaking specifically in Des Moines, and I know that's the case over in Eastern Iowa as well, but ensuring that we're continuing to grow that stock over time as our population grows too.
Yeah, then I mean, what does this all mean for, at different levels of government? How are local, state, or maybe even federal agencies stepping in to to help encourage building affordable housing projects and that sort of development?
Well, I think one of the most important things that the legislature has done over the last couple of sessions was to increase the amount of investment in the workforce housing tax credit program. And I might get the numbers off just a little bit, so they have to bear with me. But we had been facing an extreme backlog of availability within that program run by the Iowa Department of Economic Development and the Iowa Finance Authority. And the fact that the legislature was able to put in, I think, $10 million 2 years ago back into that program above and beyond what the current capacity was a really good thing. That being said, it was a drop in the bucket because what that money went towards was removing the backlog from the books of projects that were approved for tax credits, but were unable to get funding for those projects. And so the fact that now those projects are being funded, and by the way, 100% of those projects went into rural Iowa, which is an incredibly important aspect, I think, so that we can remove some of those barriers to entry, provide incentives for developers and other organizations to come in and build those homes in a way that will make it possible for a business to do business. So, literally turn a profit, which is how the whole system works. A business isn't going to go into a situation where they know they're going to lose money. That's just the bare facts of it. So these programs are incredibly important to provide the incentive and the market feasibility for these companies to invest in projects, particularly in rural Iowa, and particularly in a way that will launch into large-scale home building in these areas. Excuse me. But as I said, that was only a drop in the bucket a couple of years ago. I know that there's plans and further discussion to increase that investment moving forward so that we can move into new projects and better projects. And so that's something that we're really excited about and something that I think you'll see a lot of conversation about come 2021 in January.
Yeah, and Marissa, as you can see, this is an issue that really brings a lot of folks together as well. There are so many aspects of life that housing impacts, and I think that everybody in central Iowa for sure, but across the state is really starting to understand how important it is to have adequate housing for everybody who chooses to live here. If we want to grow our population, we have to ensure that we have the housing stock to do so. And kind of going back to your question regarding where state, local, and federal policy steps in, at the beginning here, I mentioned, we want to keep people in that kind of 30% range as far as how much of their income they're devoting to their housing costs. And at a certain point, say, somebody's really making like $30,000 a year, it's really hard and it's not feasible for builders to build units to rent at $500 or $600 a month with current construction costs. So that's why it's so important for policies to be passed, such as the workforce housing tax credits and what was going on there in the past couple of years, as well as investing more greatly in the State Housing Trust Fund, which is really a great way to allocate money to the different counties across the state of Iowa. Because the beauty of that program is that it's still up to really the local state housing trust funds, or the local housing trust funds that cover these different counties across the state, such as the Polk County Housing Trust Fund, so that we can best allocate those funds, as it makes sense across our communities. Because the needs of rural Iowa as it pertains to housing are very different than the needs in Iowa City or Cedar Rapids and Des Moines. And so that's also a great funding mechanism for affordable housing, because like I said, it's really not feasible to create these new homes and new apartment units without some sort of subsidy to make that work for the developers. So we hope to see an increase in that fund as well in the coming year.
I just like to add zoning. I think that's another thing that we don't think about. It's sort of a wonky thing, but thinking about allowing diverse housing types, smaller lot sizes. There is instead of, we've probably all heard of NIMBY, there's a YIMBY, yes in my backyard, going through the House and the Senate right now. I don't know how, what it will do, but that's a way to think about diversifying our housing stock throughout our neighborhoods.
Yeah, and especially Joe, you can speak to this, but what is the role of developers and the business community and all this? What can be done to encourage them to, work on affordable housing projects?
Right, well, I think for the business community, it's twofold. From an association's perspective, from the Iowa Business Council, that's why we're lifting this up in our legislative platform. It's been one of our top legislative issues for at least the last 2 years, and probably going back even farther than that. So bringing the industry voice to this topic, I think, is very important to highlight the fact that this is a business issue. This is an economic growth issue. It's sort of is a I'll say a non-traditional sort of business topic for an association like ours to talk about in the grand scheme of things. But when you really look down at it, this is a top priority for businesses. If workers aren't able to work close to their place of employment, they're not going to work at those institutions or those facilities. And so it's really a workforce issue too. We really need to be cognizant about providing these affordable housing and workforce housing opportunities within these centers that can drive further business expansion, and also provide wealth building opportunities for individuals, which will only help Iowa's economic prosperity into the future. So I think it's really important for us to add our collective industry voice to this. And I think from specific builders' perspective or developers' perspectives, it's just about using the tools that are available to them, like the workforce housing credit, or partnering with great organizations like Lauren's or Stephanie's, to see what those business opportunities might be, particularly in rural Iowa, or maybe outside of their general scope of practice, because there's a huge need out there. This is a great business opportunity for organizations to latch into. And I think it will really provide, as I said at the beginning, sort of that fuel for recovery as we're coming out of the pandemic, and as we're coming out of the economic consequences as a result of the pandemic.
See, and we have an audience question here. So what strategies would you recommend when dealing with a not in my backyard mindset or other entrenched opposition / misunderstanding related to affordable housing?
That's a great question. I think Stephanie probably will have a great answer as well. But one thing that I would say is one common misperception is that if housing that's deemed to be affordable is being built in neighborhoods that property values go down. That is completely unproven. And so that's something, it really does not decreased property values or of any sort in neighborhoods. So that's something to kind of fight back against and be prepared for, I think, rather is probably the most important thing, because that's such a common argument. But, on a humane level, you have to really think about who's moving in here. And it's the folks who are boosting up your economy locally. So we see in certain areas of the Des Moines metro that we need more affordable housing in really these kind of service centers. So think about places where big malls are, and think about all the folks who are working at those malls. It'd probably be pretty nice if they had a shorter commute rather than a 25 minute drive to work, because that's the only place they could find an affordable place to live. So you really have to think of it as what your local economy needs. And the more that you can, kind of calibrate that where people live, the more that your local economy will thrive. And so that's my 2 cents on the issue.
I live in a neighborhood with mixed housing types, and and it's an older neighborhood, and this is just more not empirical, not data driven, but just living in neighborhoods. Design makes a big difference, and so if it is designed to fit within the neighborhood and built of quality construction, and we fund it as a society, we put value in it, I think that can go a long ways. But it's tough because people have entrenched ideas, and we know that, now we're getting more behavioral sciences, but people don't like to change their ideas. And so you have to do a lot of education, which the housing trust funds across the state of Iowa do a great job of doing, and sort of laying that groundwork so that when a project does come up, but they're going to school with your children anyways. This is not, these are working folks so just to try to sort of share that. And I think some people too realize it's their children, starting out as well. And so if you can sort of bring it home, it makes it easier.
And I would just add that, to Lauren and Stephanie's great point, literally this is the backbone of the local economy. When you think about the service industry or the individuals that are working hourly jobs, if those individuals are not able to work or provide those services, the local economy, effectively collapse, because that tax base will diminish, businesses will go out. And so we really have to think about it in terms of economics, I think, and what the long-term consequences would be if we don't do this now, put in the practices to allow for these sorts of affordable housing projects to come in, what the dire consequences would be for the local economy. And they're not good. And so I think being understanding of what the true situation is, not giving into fear, and just being, graceful with the situation. I think if 2020 has taught us anything, it's about having an open mind and understanding and projecting grace. And I think as we all try to navigate, turbulent times, those are 3 good pillars to rely back to.
If I could add one thing to mine, going back to the zoning, if it is already zoned for housing to be there, then it doesn't have to go through a public process, because it by right can be there. So local governments and state governments can do a lot, mostly local because they control zoning, by allowing the mixed housing type already, and then it doesn't need that public process. It should just be there by right.
And another audience question, how does a person's credit score affect the loans and such that would assist them with some of these programs? Most of the time, unfortunately, someone with a lower credit score also, would have a lower income.
Yeah. So since I do that, I'll start with that one. We believe in home buyer education. I actually ran an organization for 6 years, and that was our focus. And I am a strong believer in it. We could do better in the state of Iowa. Most states apply for those federal dollars as through the Iowa Finance Authority or their version of, which about doubles the amount of money you bring into your state. And in our state, we choose not to do that at this time. So I would, if anyone wants to take action on that, I would, we could get more money to provide that housing financial literacy counseling, which in the pandemic has become even more up to the front, how much we need those services and need to support them as people are struggling to stay in their homes. So I think, through education, and there's some good organizations doing it throughout the state, but I think we can do more. And then the other piece is, like, for us, we don't price our loans based off your credit score. So you have to have a minimum credit score, but a person with a 670 credit score gets the exact same interest rate and loan terms as a person with an 800 credit score. And so the more we can provide products like that, I think, so that people they aren't being put in a worse position financially because their credit score is low due to their income status.
I won't even chime in because Stephanie knows way more about that than I think either Joe or I do. So we'll
And I could go on forever. And we know that education is a huge compensating factor for people that have lower credit scores. So because like you said, people that are lower income tend to have lower credit scores just because they don't have the safety net. And it's not always the case, because it's not something to do with being low income. It's just not having a safety net. And so the more we can do to provide that education, and our delinquencies are incredibly low at our organization, and we are lending to the majority of our borrowers are below 80% median income. And so it can be done.
Yeah. Let's see. And I mean, with the economy the way it is, especially, going back to the onset of the pandemic in the spring, people, especially those experiencing job loss, have struggled to pay rent and, avoiding evictions. And the increase in the homeless population potentially is a major concern. So how have you seen these concerns, brought on by, all that's happening this year? How have you seen that stir the affordable housing conversation in communities across the state?
And I'll kind of talk about that and what we've seen in Polk County and what we've been doing in Polk County to really help mitigate what's going on with evictions. The hard truth of it is that the nation has been seeing an affordable housing crisis before this pandemic, and the pandemic itself has really just exacerbated it. And so what we're seeing in Polk County is that after the eviction moratoriums wore off federally and the statewide moratoriums that wore off, by August or so, what we started to see through the month of August was just a massive increase in the number of eviction filings in Polk County specifically. We are so fortunate to have wonderful elected leaders here in Polk County that quickly recognized that issue and acted upon it. And so the Polk County Board of Supervisors started a program with the Polk County Housing Trust Fund and Iowa Legal Aid to really mitigate these massive evictions, because if not for these mitigation efforts, our homelessness population or just people who are not housed or doubling up, and there are many different definitions here, but people who were evicted from their homes, that population would have just increased dramatically. And so the Polk County government allocated $800,000 for really the trust fund as well as Iowa Legal Aid to set up shop at the Polk County Justice Center and really kind of make a deal between landlords and tenants so that we could pay those tenants back rent and just really get those evictions off the book and dismiss those cases. So up to this point, we have dismissed and prevented over 200 evictions between September 1st and now. And many of those households contain children as well. So this is something, that we see and we're hearing about across the country, that, people who have lost their jobs due to COVID, or have even just had decreased hours are unable to make their rent payments. So really, some folks are owing back rent for, April, May, June, July, August, September. And so they don't, people do not have the savings and just kind of the money on hand to pay all of that back rent when these eviction moratoriums expire. And so we're really seeing this increase day by day here in Polk County. And so we're grateful for the resources to prevent those evictions, but know that it is happening in many other places across the state and across the country.
And I would just add that, that's a really big turning point potentially for the local economy and for the state's economy. As we all know, the pandemic and the job loss as a result of the pandemic, particularly in the service industry, which adversely affects, lower income people or people that, work hourly jobs. It's having a disproportionate effect on them because those are the jobs that have been lost, predominantly throughout our economy, in addition to many others, certainly. But when you think about, people that work at bars and restaurants, when you think about childcare workers, when you think about all those hourly employees that, all of a sudden are without a job because, we had to shut down to address a pandemic that we've not experienced in 102 years, that's really where policymakers, as Lauren pointed out, can step up and help them. And I think, Congress has a role in this as well. The Iowa Business Council has been employing our federal delegation in Congress at large to come up with an additional CARES package or stimulus package to address some of these issues. Obviously, that has been stuck in Congress for some time now, after the first three phases of the CARES Act went through. But I think that's, getting back to an earlier question, I think that's another really important thing that all of us can be doing right now is talking about the issue of housing with policymakers so that they fully understand the broad scope in which this, encaptures our entire economy.
From a foreclosure standpoint, it feels like we were a little better prepared as loan servicers after the foreclosure crisis, and Fannie Mae at least. So if people have a regular government loan, and then a lot of investors, including us, followed suit, provided some pretty good solutions up front. What we're finding though is with our lower income homeowners, often their taxes and then their insurance, even though they can get a forbearance and we can do things so that they don't have to pay the missed payments right away, their taxes and insurance are often a large part of their payment. And so we're seeing some people struggle to bring that current. And as this goes on longer and longer, there's some concern that could cause some real problems. So we're still holding our breath, I guess, on the homeownership side. Did we lose our leader?
I think we may have.
You did.
Todd.
I'll pass along an audience question. What resources can very small towns leverage to address this issue?
Joe, do you want to take that since you're working more in the role?
Well, I think, programs like the State Housing Trust Fund, as they distribute dollars out to local communities, I think is very important. We really come at it from like a state perspective on making sure that those dollars are secured. So I'm not as aware as probably either you are with respect to the mechanics on how individuals at the local level can then access those dollars. I think our main point is to make sure that those dollars are available, and to the mechanics side of it, making sure that those dollars are available and easily dispersed to those in need who might need them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback off of that and just talk a little bit about why funding for the state housing trust funds are so important in regard to that. Because as kind of mentioned earlier, the state housing trust funds really provide the opportunity for every different community to use those dollars in the most effective way possible. And so we're very fortunate that as of last year, I believe, the entire state of Iowa is covered by a state housing trust fund. And so with an increased amount of spending by the state government to that network, it can really provide a lot of opportunity for communities to spend that money once again in the most effective way possible that fits their needs the best. Because of course, in the city of Des Moines or in Polk County, we're going to use that money a whole lot differently than we would use it in different counties around the state, or Adair County, or even Johnson County. Cities are different. And so where you might see in a more rural area that money being allocated or invested in building single family homes or senior homes, that's also a very important aspect of all of this that we haven't touched on yet. But whether it's that, or whether it's in the city of Des Moines or the Des Moines metro area, or in Iowa City or Coralville, and maybe building a mixed use building and investing the dollars in that way. So it's really important that we increase investment there so that communities have more money to leverage in building these units.
Yeah, and I think there's so many great ideas out there and they come together. One of the things that I see, is that there's not the capacity. So there's you can get the money to do the subsidy or whatever you need, but a lot of times these are in smaller communities, volunteer driven. And to create long-term capacity, I even know that with our own organization, we know of things that we could raise capital for and subsidy and do, but nobody is out there funding the capacity for us to hire the staff to get it started. And so we really have to think about that part of it, because this is a crisis that is beyond what volunteers can solve.
Yes, thank you all for bearing with my internet issues. We're back in action. Another audience question. In this country, housing, like healthcare, is a private for-profit part of our capitalist system. Employers want to hold down wages, landlords and developers want to maximize profits. As you think big about housing in context, what is your take on approaches like a $15 minimum wage, rent control, public housing, or employer constructed housing near the workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll kind of start things off here just talking about the minimum wage. So there's a report that comes out every year from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and they are a housing advocacy organization out in DC. And they calculate every state and every county even, they calculate the housing wage. So how much do folks need to be making to afford, say, a 2-bedroom apartment? And here in the state of Iowa, across the state, it is over $15 an hour. So we know that folks aren't, or at least the minimum wage isn't up to that standard. And so if, we know that not everybody's working for $7.25 an hour, but if we could have more of a level playing field on that, in that sense, so that more folks aren't feeling that pinch of affordability, I think that would be very beneficial. And you often do see kind of minimum wage discussions creep into housing discussions as well. So it does make a lot of sense in that regard. And so that's, I think, what I have to contribute on that question.
Yeah, I certainly understand the question and have sympathy for the question. From our perspective at the Iowa Business Council, representing again some of the 22 largest companies in the state, virtually all of our positions are well above minimum wage, are above that $15 an hour aspect. But, the point's well taken. We understand that. But I also think a way to grow wealth and a way to grow prosperity is to promote, business expansion in the state so that we can have a competitive economy, so that we can have more individuals competing for different jobs that will naturally raise wages, through the market. And so I think that's an important aspect as well. And I think you'll continue to see the Business Council promoting policies that promote economic prosperity for all Iowans.
And I think that, there's lots of different housing policy tools that can be used, and each community has to look at like what works for them. One that we really haven't done, but some of my partners across the nation have done, are land trusts. And what that does is it, rising housing when land is getting more expensive. Now, we don't have such a big problem in Iowa, but we need to look towards the future, because what is going to change? And that's where the land is held more cooperatively, and there's a shared equity. And so that and I'm not describing it, you can go look at it and be really more articulate, but that's another tool. So I think each community has to look at what tool is going to work best for their community and advocate for the expansion of that.
Yeah, and just as a reminder for everyone, I know we have just a little over 10 minutes left, so definitely please keep the questions coming in the Whova chat feature. It's great how many questions we're getting. So so as we kind of, begin to wrap things up, what are some programs that you've all seen in Iowa or elsewhere that, help bolster construction of smaller homes and make home ownership more accessible, or, more appealing to developers to step in and work on these projects?
Was the one I've talked about before. It's really, one of the best tools that's out there. So I'll continue to harp on it, is the workforce housing tax credit program. That's really a key for developers to get in there, particularly in the rural communities, and provide those housing opportunities. It's ripe for investment right now. We had a great investment from the legislature a few years ago, as I mentioned earlier, but I think given the state of the economy and the way in which housing can really fuel an opportunity for regrowth and to reach new economic heights, you'll see the Business Council advocating for more investment in that fund, and then working with our allies and partners in the business community and in the nonprofit sector to try to figure out what other ideas are out there that we can utilize or try to think about, and think creatively and boldly on new programs that might exist, and looking to outside entities, outside organizations of Iowa, to see what's worked well in other states too. I think the Governor's Advisory Economic Recovery Advisory Board that just concluded their work has housing throughout their top 18 recommendations that will be submitted to the governor, which will then serve as the foundation for her 2021 legislative priorities to rebuild Iowa and promote new economic growth strategies within the state. So we're excited to see, what other unique ideas might be included in that report. And I think, we all just have to come together on those issues. Workforce housing tax credits is one program, one that we've really promoted over the years, but I'm sure there are others that we would be happy to support as well.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, and going off the tax credits, there has been an interesting tax credit program to come out of some other Midwestern states that is pretty interesting, that we could, take a look at, because we need to be really creative with these solutions, because, as we kind of touched on, every community is different. And so there is a tax credit program that is somewhat similar to the low-income housing tax credits that the federal government distributes, but it's a state-based program. And so we're seeing that program pop up in South Dakota, as well as in Minnesota and some other Midwestern states. And it has been effective in, kind of incentivizing the business community in a different way, and sometimes, making those credits more available for smaller developments that may be better suited for our rural communities, as the federal low-income housing tax credits may be, better suited for larger developments in cities. So that's something that we're seeing pop up in, around the Midwest. But just to echo Joe there, I think that we're very excited to see what comes out of the recommendations from the Economic Recovery Task Force as well.
And then I was just going to mention in the national perspective, there's the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act that is getting some traction. So if people want to reach out to their local or their state, federal representatives on that, and it's similar to the program that Lauren was talking about that some states are doing, and that it's similar to the low-income housing tax credit, but it's for home ownership and it's for new construction and rehabilitation of homes, because we know we have land and we have homes that would provide great affordable homes if only they were maintained. And I think that's especially when you look at housing studies of rural Iowa, that's a real concern.
We have another audience question. Is the city of Cedar Rapids offering similar tax breaks for developers of affordable housing as for market rate housing, like the apartments on the Banjo block? Those are market rate and got millions in tax concessions. I sure wish there was someone from the Cedar Rapids city manager's office or one of those experts here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the Cedar Rapids government reporter. I did just start in June, just as a disclosure to you all. I know there was one project approved in August under the city's local match economic development program. There's a $30 million capital investment up front, and that's on the southwest side of Cedar Rapids. And the local match program provides a 10-year, 100% exemption of new value, which is created by the real property investments associated with the project. I'm reading off city documents. I have not just memorized that all, but that's the most I have to offer on that subject. I'm sorry, there's not a city official here to speak to that a little bit more. But yes, I know that is something that's on the front of the city's mind as everyone recovers from the derecho.
Well, and I would be remiss if I could just mention two things that, of course, the city of Cedar Rapids provides $1 million a year that we do not use for operating money, but we use specifically to provide forgivable loans for people to do renovations to their home, as well as some closing cost assistance for lower income home buyers. Also, and there will be press coming out about this because it's just getting off the ground, but there's been tremendous fundraising in Cedar Rapids around the derecho, and working in cooperation with the Housing Trust Fund in Cedar Rapids, it's called the Housing Fund for Lynn County, as well as the United Way, Matthew 25 Neighborhood Finance Corporation. There'll be some funds available for low income, below 80% median income home owners to get those repairs that aren't covered by insurance or FEMA done to their home through a forgivable loan. So look for information on that. And right now, Waypoint would be the organization to contact, but it's just getting off the ground. So if someone doesn't get back to you for a week or two, it's just because we just found out about the funding yesterday. So there's some things happening, yes.
Awesome. And then what can neighborhoods and community leaders do to encourage this sort of development in their own neighborhoods? And, are there any shining examples that you've all seen out there?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, we often talk about the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard sentiment. And I think that sentiment is very vocal, but it's a much more rare to be vocal in support of affordable housing development in your community, or at least we did have one development that kind of got into a little bit of a jam here last year in one of our metro suburbs, and the organizations that were involved in that development that really was kind of canceled, for lack of a better word, by a city council vote. There was a very vocal response in support of that development going forward. And then when push came to shove, it was successful in getting on the ground in one way or another. So I would just say, we know that the support against this type of, the vocal support against this type of development is often very loud. Let's try to make the support for this type of development just as loud in your respective community or neighborhood.
We have a comment. Cedar Valley Habitat for Humanity is part of the effort that Stephanie described.
Oh,
So,
oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't know that. I apologize.
all good. Yeah, I mean, I know we just have a couple minutes left here, but do you all have any final takeaways on, from a public policy standpoint, what do you think the appetite will be in the State House for really working on affordable housing issues in the coming year?
Well, I think from our perspective, and first of all, Marissa, thanks again for the invitation to be here today. I thought this was a great discussion. Looking into 2021 and the legislative prospects for affordable and workforce housing, I think they're quite high. Again, as I said at the beginning, you have Republicans and Democrats talking about this issue. You have, more importantly, their constituents in their hometowns talking about this issue. And so I think that's really going to lead to a fruitful discussion and hopefully some advanced public policy moving forward this session. And you'll see ourselves, the Business Council, partnering with so many other organizations to make sure that is addressed, and really leaning on legislators in a big way to make sure that they understand the long-term economic benefits of affordable and workforce housing in Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much, Marissa, for moderating this morning. It's a great discussion to have, and I'm grateful to be alongside Stephanie and Joe here with who are so incredibly experienced in this issue. And I would just say, I'm very optimistic, and I think we're all feeling pretty optimistic at this point. And part of the reason for that is because Iowa really has the opportunity to do this. We haven't experienced the crisis to the levels of our friends on the East and West Coast yet. And so we have the opportunity to really kind of be somewhat ahead of the curve and invest in this adequately and do what needs to be done to ensure that everybody in our state has a safe, stable, and affordable place to call home. So feeling very optimistic going into the 2021 session, and optimistic because we have the opportunity to get it right.
And I'll just say thank you, ditto. And I really appreciate the great questions. Obviously, there's a very engaged audience, and I wish we could all be together, and hopefully next year we will be. Thank you very much, Marissa, for providing this opportunity.
Oh, thank you to the Gazette, and thank you to our curious audience members. That's a wrap on this session, and thank you all for attending, and a special thanks to our panelists. You can continue on the community development track at 9:45. So just in a few minutes with the group violence intervention session in the Whova app, followed by closing keynote David Kennedy at 11 a.m. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.